Welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers online, in-store, and everywhere in between. And now, here are Sri and Peter. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CPG Guys podcast. I'm PVSB, one of the aforementioned CPG guys, and I am joined, as always, by my ride or die colleague on this journey. He is an impresario in the CPG space. He's the man who goes by one name. His name is, of course, Sri. Sri, hi, how you doing today, brother?
Mr. Bond, a pleasure to be doing this week over week with you. And I got to tell you, 160 episodes later, I know both you and I know when we started this, we did not know this is how fast it would scale. And I am honored that you chose me to be your partner and we get to do this twice a week now.
Sri, I think the thing that amazes both of us so much is we can be at conferences, sure, we expect that, but dining on the streets of New York or standing in a TSA security line, people recognize us and they reach up to us and they tell us how much they appreciate the podcast for what it's doing, building knowledge and helping people navigate this rapid transformation that's happening in the omni-channel CPG space. So thanks again for joining me on this. And before we continue with the episode, I want to remind everybody that all of our content linked to our podcast on upwards of 40 platforms, our Instagram, our Twitter feed, and other content that we're publishing. Just go to cpgguys.com. You can find it all there. And please also visit us on LinkedIn. Go to LinkedIn. You can get there from cpgguys.com, or you can just go to LinkedIn and in the search box, enter in CPG Guys. And when you get there, just follow us. We publish a lot of content. It's all free. We don't charge for it. So everyone can afford that. And you can be part of this growing community that is about exploring how consumers are engaged by retailers and brands in this increasingly digitally driven world. And please do that. I think our audience knows how fascinated Sri and I are with certain categories in our space, notably adult beverages, and that we are always welcoming guests from this consumable segment. Our guest today leads the U.S. e-commerce business at Molson Coors Beverage Company. Her tenure at MCBC, the e-commerce channel has grown triple digits and become one of the top growth drivers for the company. She joins Molson Coors in 2018 after 10 years with Kimberly-Clark Corporation. Please join us in welcoming Sara Goucher. Sara, greetings. How are you?
I'm good. Good afternoon, everyone.
Thank you for joining us today. We know it will be a lively conversation, but before we dive into the questions Sri and I have for you, we would love for you to explain to our audience a little bit about what your role is at Molson Coors.
Yeah, so a pithy headline would be, I sling suds on the internet. But obviously, it's a bit more complex than that, of course. So I lead U.S. e-commerce beer strategy for Molson Coors. I have a team under me that's running two primary channels, our B2C side of the business, which is, in this case, distributor to retailer to consumer selling, and then our B2B side of the business, which is our distributor to retailer selling. So we now have more and more distributors that are actually selling beer to the retailer via e-commerce. So my team sets the strategy, the vision, owns the relationships with strategic retail partners such as Instacart, your Drizlys, and then supporting our click and mortar accounts like Walmart and Kroger. We're also starting to explore and determine kind of what is going to be the pathway, if you will, within on-premise e-commerce. So, the pandemic really shook everything up. And so my team touches everything as we continue to address consumer and retailers' needs within the e-commerce space.
That's terrific, and thank you for that high-level overview. I know we're going to double-click down on that in some of the questions, and we'll touch on things like the three-tier system and tied house laws, which are some of my favorite topics to discuss. So great conversation coming up. Let me launch right into it, Sara. I'm going to ask you to dive a little deeper into your group because you talked a lot about D2C and B2B. So I want to understand in a little more granularity, what are kind of the core activities that your team are doing on a day-to-day basis, and particularly how you interface with traditional sales, with marketing, with your distributors, and really navigating that matrix system.
So there's a few primary activities within kind of that culmination, if you will, that my team is focused on. So in one bucket, we're really building internal capabilities, and that's cutting across pretty much all of the functions, right? So how do our brands start to think about how they go to market in an omni-channel world? What platforms are going to service their needs to drive consumer adoption, consumer acquisition, and then driving retention? How do brand programmings and launches evolve? So as we're bringing new innovation to market, such as Topo Chico and Vizzy, hard seltzer innovation that we've rolled out over the last year or two, we're partnering with our brands with how you land a big idea within the e-commerce space. So how does that idea originate? How does it take root? How does it flourish? And so we're really advising our brands within that capacity. Some of the other things that we're doing is my team is responsible for our content strategy as it relates to product detail pages and merchandising on websites, be it Walmart to Instacart to even Drizly. So my team is working with consumer research firms. We're conducting research with select retail partners to understand kind of how consumers are navigating this space, what they're engaging with, what's driving discovery, and then ultimately what's driving that conversion and repeat. With sales, we have kind of, again, within that capability space, our business, unlike traditional CPG, where I came from, is super fragmented. So we don't have one retailer that really dominates the lion's share of our volume, like you might see in toilet paper or diapers, right? Where Amazon, Walmart, and Costco, really make up the bulk of that volume. So because we have such fragmentation, my team is helping our sales teams understand how do you build joint business plans that don't just encompass your in-store levers that you need to pull, but how does that encompass what that strategy needs to look like online, and how does it complement what you're doing in store? So we really touch a lot of different areas, from building capabilities and how you build the business plan, to how you merchandise products online, to how our brands think about going to market differently when they launch innovation and build advertising programs.
Sara, first of all, welcome to the show. And you already mentioned this is a lot about working with distributors as they are allowed to sell directly. But for the benefit of our audience, in the food and beverage space, the rules of how you can sell online versus this category, alcohol, is radically different. And it's the same for fast-moving consumer goods and most other categories. So I know the words tight house laws as well as the three-tier system exist over here. Could you take a few minutes just to explain and educate our audience on alcohol and e-commerce? What is tight house laws? What is the three-tier system? And how does this come together to enable you to actually be in the internet retailing, for lack of a better word?
The space that I'm operating in is really governed by laws that predate the internet, predate a lot of innovation. Tied house laws and the three-tier system is really kind of linked. So following the repeal of prohibition, tied house laws and the three-tier system were set up to essentially create a layer, if you will, between suppliers and retailers to ensure that there wasn't undue influence being done between the supplier and the retailer. That's really where the tied house laws come in. So they govern, and they're governed at both a federal and a state level. So we have nuance state to state with even what we can do, be it pricing, be it advertising. But they govern how suppliers can engage with a retailer to ensure that there isn't any undue influence or things that can be perceived as value to influence a decision on assortment or display activity, et cetera. So unlike more traditional CPG, we're really operating a business that feels like 50 countries in one, where promotions and the types of advertising you can do, as nuanced to things like signage that's in the windows in some states is allowed to talk about pricing, in other states that's not allowed. So you can imagine this gets pretty complex when you're trying to scale programming both physically and digitally. So that's kind of tied house laws in a nutshell. The three-tier system is standing all of that up. And mind you, our distributors are core to our success. They provide us a strategic advantage for knowing those markets, being the local liaisons with our retail and GM managers, boots on the ground. So we would not be successful without our distributors. But that three-tier system just simply is this idea of kind of one supplier selling to distributor is 2 of the 3-tier system, and then distributor selling to retailer is really that 2 to 3 handoff before it gets to the consumer. So within alcohol, within beer specifically, Molson Coors cannot stand up a direct-to-consumer business. We first go through a distributor who then goes to the retailer who then sells to the consumer.
Sarah, that was a great and very understandable explanation. So thank you for that. Let's now apply that to the transformation that's going on. Hardly a day goes by that Shri and I don't see another retail media platform emerge. So what I think our audience would love to understand is, how are you, governed by these rules, able or not able to engage with different types of retail media platforms? On the one hand, I'd say something like Walmart Connect or Kroger Precision Marketing, which are owned lock, stock, and barrel by the retailer, versus a marketplace like Instacart or Drizly. What are you not able to do in terms of investing to create brand awareness?
Fairly simply, if they're not a retailer, it opens up a ton more opportunities for us to more directly partner, or I would say partner in a more traditional sense for what you see in traditional CPG. So with Instacart, with Drizly, with Minibar, those marketplace models that aren't actually holding inventory, setting price, those kind of be in some of the key criteria for being classified as a retailer. We can treat them like an advertising channel pretty simply. Now, there are nuances to that, which is literally like the tattoo I should have on my arm for working in this business, because there still will be state by state regulation as it relates to kind of what types of supplier and just alcohol advertising can be done, kind of regardless of the medium in which it's being delivered. But we do have more flexibility. So you will see, if you were to log on to Instacart or Drizly today, hopefully you'll buy our products. You will see things like sponsored ads that we are investing in on platforms like Instacart and Drizly. You will see a lot of retail ID or tagged kind of off-platform traffic driving initiatives via paid social or programmatic video that will call out, get this ordered and delivered by Drizly, with media that Molson Coors is running. On the flip side of that, with like your Walmarts, your Krogers of the world, you're absolutely right. Investing directly in those platforms is currently not a lever we can pull if there isn't a kind of third-party entity that's operating in between, if you will, that's ensuring that that money is not transferring to the retailer. But there are states that allow flexibility in owned advertising that the supplier is running, where they can drive traffic in the market, but that varies state by state. So in some states, we actually can buy like an Instagram paid social buy and call out, get Coors Light, buy online, pick up in store at Walmart. In other states, you need to feature 2 or more non-competitive retailers. In other states, it's 3. So again, there's always nuance, there's always layers to unpack. But if you had to kind of neatly tie that up, if they're not a retailer, there's definitely more flexibility, and it starts to mimic more of what you would see in traditional CPG. And I think your second part of that question was, how are we navigating it? So what we're seeing, particularly within the alcohol space, is fortunately, a decent amount of where our growth is coming from, where our mix is shifting, is in some of those marketplace models like Drizly, like Instacart, et cetera. So we're building very robust joint business plans with them to help drive first category growth. How do we elevate beer, get beer into more baskets, drive awareness of beer, because beer in grocery, especially in the summer, is the number 1 category within the grocery channel. Then C-store, which obviously does a lot of our business. So your 7-Elevens, your Speedways of the world, it's a massive trip driver. So we are investing in those platforms like your Instacarts and Drizzlies to really stand up the importance of beer in the basket. And then with your more traditional click and mortar retailers, we continue to partner with them, with our legal teams, respectful and operating within the 3-tier system and tied house laws, to figure out what opportunities we have to continue to elevate both of our brands and drive more consumption of the category, depending on where the consumer wants to buy it, be it in store or online.
All right. Thank you for that detailed explanation, Sarah. That was awesome. I think, we had about 6 to 9 months ago, we had done another episode on the tied house laws and 3-tier system. But from what I heard you, I don't know if 1 tattoo would suffice, because you got to get one for every state, which means you're probably getting 50 and a half tattoos, and maybe some more in the future, depending on how many more states we may add in the country. But let me jump to, given what you just explained and the constraints that exist as a result of your explanation, What are levers you can use? You mentioned content earlier, right at the opening. And what are the levers that actually can have a material impact on consumer engagement in Molson Coors? And then if you are able to do that, how would you measure success, like ROI outcomes? And then given that it's such a restricted outcome on the e-commerce side, how do you actually justify the ROI for resourcing?
So a couple of things in there. What we have seen with some of our marketplace models, as we've continued to shift investment and prioritize areas such as paid search on some of these platforms, we've seen growth for the category and, for us, share growth within the category. So that's been very encouraging to share back to leadership, right? Like as we're growing share of voice on category or non-category terms, we're actually driving, consumption of our business. And in terms of some of the information that we're getting as a result of that, some of these platforms can share fairly robust insights. Are they new to your brand, which is always really exciting to see that we're actually driving just net new consumers into our brand? Are they new to the platform? So that becomes a very important conversation with the retailer to say, hey, we're not just driving our own business, we're actually driving customer acquisition to your platform. So how do we start to think about what are those additional opportunities? Who are those consumers that look alike to this consumer base that's already converting? And how do we try to amplify that, test and learn more robustly so we can all see both of our businesses rise? So sponsored search, I think, will continue to be a critical focus for us in the future. In terms of some of the other levers that we can pull, as cookies start to go away, first-party data is becoming more and more critical for various different suppliers, kind of agnostic of the category or industry that they're in. And that's definitely an area of focus for us. I mean, the good thing about selling beer is people like beer. Like it's a fun category. It has, tons of occasions in which people are consuming it, right? To celebrate, a birthday, to rooting on your football team, to a barbecue with your family. And so there's a lot of opportunities that we have, in the market organically to interact with consumers, be it at concerts, sweepstakes, programs that are being run through a retailer. So we have had a significant push this year in first-party data collection, and we're adding tons and tons of records and using that to inform more precise marketing to serve the right message to the right person at the right time. And so how we're measuring that impact, simply from CPM improvements to click-through rates to what that conversion looks like and starting to segment appropriately. So that's definitely become a focus for us. And we've stood up an amazing precision marketing team that eventually reports up through our CMO. Some of the other levers that we're focused on is certainly content. Content is king, really, right, for everybody. But within the alcohol space, when you have fewer levers that you can pull relative to traditional CPG because of tied house laws, content becomes really important. I mean, this category, super complex. You got a lot of SKUs, a lot of brands within these segments. So how do you ensure when consumers are coming to the platform and searching for things like, low ABV beers or hazy IPAs, how do you ensure that your product is rising to the top and enticing them away to drive that share of mouth, if you will, to get your product into their basket? So we focus a ton on content. We measure that both quantitatively and qualitatively, partnering directly with our retailers and primarily monitoring add to cart and conversion changes as we're running different tests and learns. We've seen tremendous lifts and impacts with some of the different strategies we've deployed with content. So that's just a few examples. There's a ton of different levers that we're pulling. But in terms of how we're justifying the e-commerce investment, within the organization, is we have a lot of click and mortar retailers where over the last couple of years, some of their growth, in some instances, their only growth was coming from e-commerce. So it's a question of, as consumers continue to transition online, we're seeing incrementality too. We're actually seeing that the shopper who buys their beer online and not just in store is actually spending more overall in the category. So that's another data point that helps to justify the investment. But as consumers shift online and or interact and engage with this category online, we need to ensure that our brands are front and center. And that is how we're having those investment conversations. This is where kind of the next wave of legal drinking age consumers are. This is where brands are being built. And so we've got to make sure that our brands are merchandised in a way, discoverable, enticing to drive that conversion, that consumers are aware. They associate online beer with Molson Coors products to drive our long range consumption goals and share goals for the market. So we've seen tremendous growth over the last few years. Obviously, the pandemic helped to accelerate that. But consumers like shopping for beer online, and we want to ensure Molson Coors products are in the basket.
Before we continue with this week's episode, a brief message about new.
The Network of Executive Women is a growing community of over 14,000 professionals representing nearly 900 organizations across North America. This week, you can attend Operating in a Post-COVID World on Thursday, December 16, 2021 at 11:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Central Time, where panelists will discuss the evolution of traditional workspaces, leading and interacting with your team virtually, virtual interviewing skills, market shifts, women leaving the workforce, and supply chain challenges. Visit newonline.org/events to register.
For more information on how to get involved with New, visit newonline.org/CPGguys. Don't forget to tune in to Advancing All Women podcast on Voice America, hosted by new President and CEO Sara Alter. Listen every Friday at 7 a.m. Pacific Time on the Voice America Empowerment Channel, with rebroadcasts weekly on the Voice America Influencers Channel. And of course, download episodes after they air wherever you get your podcasts.
Remember, visit newonline.org/CPGguys to learn more about becoming a member of New.
And now back to our episode already in progress.
Let me remind the audience that today we're speaking with Sara Goucher, Director of E-commerce at the Molson Coors Beverage Company. Sara, that's really powerful information. I can certainly speak for my other role at Fetch Rewards that we're very pleased to be partnered with Molson Coors and supplying you with the first-party data to help power the insights that are leading you to growth in this transformative economy. Let's turn to the retailers now. In your opinion, are retailers sufficiently prioritizing the importance of adult beverage as a category contributor? And how are you able to elevate the focus retailers should be putting against your category to contribute to their overall sales growth?
I do believe that a large subset of our retail base is prioritizing it. Now, if we had had this question pre the pandemic, I probably would have said a fewer amount were prioritizing it. And so necessity, right, spurred this change. But what we're seeing is as our company comes with a perspective on category growth drivers, how consumers shop, we have this whole philosophy around purchase drives purchase, and that guides all of our principles when we are building kind of category reviews, segmentation strategy, brands, what pack sizes, and all of those things, the different feature and display, and that encompasses online as well. As we bring forward those insights, we have seen tremendous adoption of what we've been able to demonstrate and show as value to those retailers to elevate in spaces where traditionally they would say, hey, if I'm partnering with the Doritos, I could get $50,000, for this homepage takeover. And we're saying, can't pay for that, tied house laws. But this is why it matters for your consumer base to be elevating the awareness of beer. And so we move with every decision, everything we present to the retailers with a consumer and a category lens, first and foremost. And where, again, you would see this manifest itself is pre the pandemic, only about 20% of consumers knew they could get beer online and delivered to their home. It was just like, no, there's no way, can't be legal, or I know you can get everything else online, but no way for beer. That has shifted dramatically to about 60% now are aware. So that still means there's 40% that are unaware that you can get beer online, either for pickup or delivery. And so we've really been partnering with retailers. So the ones that are leaning in the most, you'll see are doing things like talking about it in their social handles, talking about it in their CRM efforts, elevating an aisle. And a lot of that insight has been spurred by either test and learns that we've constructed with them or simulations that we've done with how people navigate the category and those practices being adopted into how they've designed their taxonomy, what they've instructed all of our competitors to do from a product detail page, best class kind of merchandising strategy. So there's really a lot of tools that we're kind of sharing with our retailers. And we've definitely seen the change in a lot of different pockets. And it's benefiting both of us to be focused on this space online.
I'm going to jump to a slightly more elevated question for you as opposed to just being category specific, Sara. And that is, we love to ask a question of many of our guests in the digital space, especially as an e-com leader. What's the link between, e-commerce and in-store sales. And, Peter and I know, it's not that we're convinced, we actually know, I'll say it authoritatively, that e-commerce actually influences in-store sales. And what role does your team have in the in-store space as a result?
So that's exactly it, right? We're seeing probably about 70% kind of more macro level of digital activity influencing in-store sales as we continue to gain more robust insights specific to not just our beer category, but more specifically within seltzers versus light lagers versus craft. We want to share that information back to be as effective with driving our retailers' business, our distributors' business, and of course, our business. So in terms of that influence, I think specifically within beer too, this cohort of who will fill the pipeline of consumers within beer is growing up in an age where, the internet is ubiquitous. Buying every category under the sun is ubiquitous. And so we are working with our retailers and working with our brand teams, as I mentioned earlier, about influencing kind of how we shifted investment, how we've shifted messaging, how we've prioritized different channels and programming solutions. Because even if ultimately that sale doesn't occur instantly online, that consumer is building discovery of our brands and awareness of our brands to ultimately purchase it in store or online. And so that's really coming to bear in more robust market mix modeling, MTAs, et cetera, to show the importance of this channel, even if the transaction doesn't occur instantly online. But really, it all goes back to the consumer that we have today and the consumer of tomorrow that we need to capture to refill our pipeline.
Sara, you talked earlier about the contribution that content makes to performance on the digital shelf. Let's go a little deeper on that. Can you talk to us about, from your perspective, how content is contributing to SEO, to the digital shelf experience, where you're focusing to invest against building that content? And is there a different content strategy dependent upon how premium or craft the product is?
I think that last one is a good question, and one that we still have opportunity to explore further, right? Like the nuances between premium versus craft. Although we have anecdotal stuff that we're seeing, such as leaning into lifestyle versus occasion, playing a stronger role depending on the segment that you're in. But in terms of content, yes, it's absolutely huge, because in a sea of the top search term within the beer category is beer, that search inquiry can pull back thousands of results depending on the retailer site and the location, because again, there's a lot of nuance here that can pull back. So trying to interpret and understand like what consumer behavior is indicating from their search inquiries, and then what you're messaging as a result of that is what my team continues to focus on. So we've really invested in understanding keyword mining, teasing out even within our own portfolio. Coors Light versus Miller Lite is one brand driving more engagement and conversion with sports related search terms, right? Like tailgating, versus another brand being more about kind of holiday and pairing of recipes. So we're testing all of those nuances to figure out what are they actually meaning when they start cast that really wide net of beer or tailgating beer, to hone in on specifically what's going to satisfy that occasion, as well as in the programming then that we execute. So we just ran a test with a retailer in the southwest part of this country to understand impulse. And that was a really insightful partnership that we did, because we started to get a sense for, again, based on search behavior, what are people looking for, but then which brands resonated with recipe pairing versus recipe in, like beer in the recipe, right? That's even more nuanced. And then even which brands are more effective in driving that add to cart checkout. You might also like this. Did you forget your beer? So from a content perspective, we're really casting a wide net outside of PDP, but we're primarily focused on SEO and segmenting that SEO, kind of that keyword strategy based on purchase occasion and what that intent is actually seeking, as well as kind of merchandising and category placements on the website to figure out what's going to be most impactful for the retailer and for our business.
So I'm sure over the course of this, which sometimes feels like the forever pandemic, last 18 odd months or so, because now you are working in e-commerce, you probably have access to a lot of data, more data than you ever had in terms of sales and where products are moving to which distributors, et cetera. What are some behavioral changes in alcohol beverage retail that you've seen? And are these influencing choices you choose to make? They could be trips, product mix, sizes, whatever the case might be.
Even before the pandemic, we started to see the hard seltzer space actually creeping up and surpassing beer, like your traditional kind of beer that you see at sporting events, beer that you see at concerts. And it was crazy, right, to see that pass happen because it hasn't happened offline, right? So that goes back to some of the conversation we were having earlier about bringing those insights internally to our brands and saying, hey, there's something here. Like we've got to ensure that we show up differently, or how we brief our agencies. They've got to deliver a mechanism, right, to convert those shoppers and capture them. But in addition to that, I talked about the insight around awareness. With some of our retailers, we were finding different ways to tell a story about how important it is to convert beer into the basket, and getting this idea of tackling awareness online as being like the number one objective we all had to go after, because only 20% knew. That has rapidly moved to 60%. You would have seen on-premise accounts, right, during the height of the pandemic to survive talking about to-go alcohol options. In some instances, laws changed that were likely not going to change had this hopefully once in a lifetime event happen to the world. And so, that had tremendous impact on the business and the industry as a whole. But some of the other behavior changes that we've seen are what trips are being made. So we're seeing more frequent trips with beer in the basket. We're seeing the online beer buyer is spending more, or the omni-channel beer buyer is spending more than just spending it in store. We're continuing to see awareness creep up as retailers and suppliers execute call to actions and messaging within TV advertising, even something that you probably never thought you were going to see a couple of years ago, even to go messaging like physically outside of their stores. So just tons of adoption within this space. And it's been really encouraging because we're basically about 5 years into the future right now from where we thought we were going to be pre the pandemic. So that's really changed how quickly resources have been allocated, budget has been allocated, and even how our brands have pivoted what they're spending their money on to drive that acquisition into the category and into their brands.
Peter, I thought maybe I can ask a quick question on capabilities here, just with all the change that Sara's seen in the last 18 months. How about user-generated content? Do you see that in this industry at all, or not really? That could be ratings and reviews. It could be something else.
We're still figuring that out, if I can be candid. I don't have a good perspective on that. And partly, if I speak to just the ratings and reviews comment, when I started on this business, ratings and reviews were just not a capability that existed within the grocery channel and beer. So even if we were generating content like traditional ratings and reviews, there was nowhere to syndicate it, because a lot of retailers like your may have been Kroger, I'll just use them as an example, but grocery retailers in general did not have that as a capability, because they were thinking, well, no one's going to want to see a rating and review on this random 1 pound of ground beef. I'm going to apply that to all of grocery. And so we actually were one of the first brands to test a little bit of that with innovation, saying like, hey, there's probably something with innovation, maybe not on your premium light brands that have been around for 40, 50 years, but maybe on the innovation that's, speaking to a new unmet need, tackling some white space, like how do they really elevate and position themselves differently. So content, user-generated content in particular, I think it's still an area we're figuring out as a company, not just specifically within e-com, but I think more to come just as the world continues to evolve as a result of the pandemic. But it's a great question. We don't have a ton of insight into that yet.
I want to remind our audience that all of our content, links to our podcast availability on over 40 platforms. You can find our LinkedIn page. You can find links to our personal LinkedIn profiles, to our Instagram and Twitter accounts. Just go to cpgguys.com. And we are an audience-driven podcast, which means we want to talk about what you want us to talk about. Best way to do that, go to ratethispodcast.com/cpgguys and leave us a review and tell us what you want. While you're there, give us a rating. Shree's favorite number is 5, but it's entirely up to you as to what number you want to give. but we do appreciate the feedback. Hey, Sara, thank you for sharing with our audience what is clearly a very deep subject matter expertise in the area of marketing adult beverages, particularly in the beer category. You've given us a lot of food for thought and food for drink for thought. But in any event, we're incredibly grateful that you chose to join us today to talk about this transformation going on in the industry. Thank you.
Thank you guys for having me.
We will include in the liner notes to this podcast both a link to obviously MolsonCoors and to Sara's profile so that you can learn more about her and what she's bringing into the industry. But thank you so much for this. Hey, Shri, another great episode where we dropped a lot of knowledge on our audience. This was terrific. What are your thoughts?
Every time we decompose the tight house laws, something changes, there's something new. And it's amazing how the industry has evolved, Peter, that even with all the different constraints, the legislation, that business can be done, because at the end of the day, the consumer is seeking it. The number of times, Sara, you said, hey, the consumer didn't know that they could, and now that they're happy that they can, that's a big deal to be able to figure out and navigate so that the consumer can get what they want. And to me, that's a big deal. I also learned another new word, Peter. I had heard of share a wallet and share a stomach. Today I got share a mouth.
Well, there you go, Shri. More knowledge for you as well. So to our audience, we appreciate you joining us on this journey, 160 episodes in, and we look forward to having you on our next episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Thanks.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.